I've had quite a few creepy encounters while exploring abandoned places, but I think that this is probably one of the weirdest ones that neither I nor anyone involved can really explain. So this story took place about 2 or 3 years ago when I was 17 and was honestly just getting started with urban exploring. In the beginning stages of me doing this, I was honestly quite stupid with how I went about doing things. For instance, I would go alone to places at night, or if I did bring anyone, I would only bring a few girls, being a girl myself. And to make matters worse, we never bring anything to protect ourselves with, and to be honest, none of us could really hold our own. I mean, I'm sure if something really bad went down, we would fight our hardest, but that's besides the point. I'm just really glad nothing bad ever really happened. But the night in question really did spook us all. Not that it made us run out scared, but we did feel tension the entire time. This particular place was an old abandoned factory with a house right next to it. The factory, in all honesty, was very dangerous, as there were many rusted metal pieces sticking out and around, and things inside usually collapsed very easily. But again, being dumb, none of this really mattered to us. As per usual, this place was off the main roads and away from the main parts of town, but if you happen to take a certain shortcut through my town, there it was. And as it would be, the night we decided to venture in, there were no cars in sight, which honestly wasn't particularly odd. And just a note, I believe it was around 9 p.m. when the four of us shuffled into the opening in the back of the house. To give you some understanding of the layout, it was an old house that had multiple staircases to the upstairs from the ground floor, as well as multiple staircases into the basement. Us being the obnoxious teens that we were, definitely made our presence known once inside the building. We screwed around on the first floor for a bit, looking at the things left behind. We were heading upstairs when we passed a door in the hallway that had been long boarded up with 2x4s and nails. And right as we passed by that door, we heard a noise that startled all of us. It was the sound of a cat, or kitten, meowing as if it was in pain. But the most disturbing part was that you could undoubtedly tell that this was no cat, nor kitten. This was a person trying to imitate one. We were all frozen in fear and looking at each other, asking in whispers if we all indeed heard the same thing. It was confirmed. So at this point, half of us wanted to leave, and the other half wanted to wait it out and see what happened. We ended up doing a bit of both, by staying for a few minutes to see if anything else was heard, and then quietly shuffling out the same way we had entered. Now, we all forgot about this incident a few weeks after it happened, until my best friend mentioned to me a while after that on a trail adjacent to the house and factory, she and another friend had encountered the same noise right as they walked upon a tree fallen down in their path, and this took place during the daytime. Hell, there's even a small possibility that this could have been a local stray, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about when you get that gut feeling and you know that something is definitely off in a situation, just like that feeling when you're being watched. I truly believe that it was a person making those noises. Most likely a homeless one that didn't want anyone interfering with the place they were squatting in. But no matter how you look at it, it could have either been someone trying to scare us off, or someone trying to draw us in. When I was about 11, my parents, along with my grandparents, cousins, aunt, uncle, and I all went up to this vacation house that my grandparents owned. Now, this vacation house didn't have any internet and was surrounded by woods. While we didn't always have internet access, we did have phone service, so we could make phone calls. The house had TVs, but nothing was on most of the time. My oldest cousin, who we'll call Matt, was 11 at the time. When I was smaller, I was recluse, but Matt was quite the opposite. He loved adventuring in the outdoors, so naturally he said, "Want to explore the woods?" I was a bit hesitant, but I decided to go along. His brother, who we'll be referring to as K, was about 9, and his sister, who I'll call M, was about 7. They both came with us. Our parents knew we had searched the woods before, so they were fine with us leaving. Matt and I, with M and K following close behind, ran into the woods. We were there for about 10 minutes when we stumbled upon a house. My cousins and I had been to our vacation house hundreds of times and had explored these woods countless times before, and we had never seen this house. This house looked to be made of wood and was painted a rotten purple, and it had smashed windows, except for one that was looking into the house from the patio. In front of the house, there was a crooked fence with an ugly shade of vomit green peeling off. The two colors clashed and made it pretty obvious that the grass was dead and hadn't been watered for years, and upon closer inspection, it looked like flowers had once grown there, but had been squashed and had wilted. Matt, being the naive and adventurous child he was, walked up to the cracked stone path and hopped up the steps to the patio. Naturally, him being the oldest, we decided it'd be best if we followed him up the rickety steps out of fear of being left alone. There was glass on the floor, so the other windows must have been shattered recently. There were more dead plants decorating the patio, along with a bench swing. Matt then peered into the one sustained window, and I asked, "What can you see?" He replied with, "Nothing, it's too foggy." I then asked if I could take a look inside. He moved out of the way, and I looked in. It was way too thick to just be fog. It looked like someone coated the window with white paint. Matt asked, "So, what do you think is inside?" Kay replied quietly, "Probably nothing good." Kay, M, and I were too scared to be the ones to open the door, so Matt decided to do it himself. He slowly opened the door, with it making a loud creak, then a snap echoed through the woods. There was a bear trap sprawled open at the entrance, and it snapped closed on one of Matt's pant legs, narrowly missing him. We all screamed, and Kay and M ran away. I stayed and helped Matt rip apart the pant leg so he could escape. As we were doing so, I glanced up at the house from time to time while helping Matt. It was pitch black inside, other than a candle lighting the corner, and in that corner was a plump, blue chair with a doll, and the eyes were replaced with leaves, just sitting there, politely staring. In my mind, it seemed like it was waiting for us, and when Matt finally got free, I heard a noise that sounded like someone was stomping down a set of stairs. We ran as fast as our small legs could carry us, with what sounded like a man cackling far behind us. When we got back home, we told my mom, and she called the police. They weren't able to locate the person who set up the trap, but they did find the doll. So, that wasn't just me hallucinating. That night, my room has about 8 windows instead of walls. So, I just sat there, unable to fall asleep, staring out all of them, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. My cousins and I go back to that vacation house frequently because it's a good place for family reunions. But we haven't gone back into those woods since. I'm now 15. When I was 14, we lived in a small neighborhood with a large field behind our house that stretched for several acres. To the right of our house, behind a couple of streets of small houses, there was a water drainage ditch. It was concrete and about 6 feet deep, with walls that were on a steep incline and about a mile long. One end of the ditch ran into a waterfall, in which water fell 5 feet down into a creek below. The other end of the ditch held an opening into an underground tunnel. The tunnel was a little over 3 miles long and opened up near the highway. The opening has since been chained off, but as a kid, I often went down into the tunnel to mess around with friends and walk around from one end to the other in pitch black darkness. One summer day though, I was feeling bored in my house and I was tired of watching the reruns on MTV, so I decided to go for a walk and head down to the tunnel. I called my friend to ask if she was interested in joining me, but she was busy doing something. I decided to go alone and started my walk to the tunnel at the end of the ditch. When I was 10 feet from the edge of the ditch wall, I swore I could hear voices. As I stepped closer, I could see down into the ditch, and there was a Jeep Wrangler parked by the tunnel entrance and 4 guys in their 20s if I had to guess. Not wanting to talk to anyone, I stayed at the edge of the ditch and watched them disappear into the tunnel before turning to walk down to the waterfall end. I had been sitting at the edge, watching the few small fish that lived in the creek swim around for almost an hour before I heard a sound of an engine being started. I figured the Jeep guys must be finishing up at the tunnel, and I got a better view down at the ditch. I guess me standing up at the other end caught their attention, because instead of driving out of the ditch, the Jeep turned and started heading towards me. I had a weird feeling about the cars changing direction and decided to go home. Rather than walk back towards the tunnel end of the ditch that was near my house and would force me to pass them, I turned into the field and started my walk across to my backyard. Due to the length of the ditch and the direction it ran, the walk was about 1.5 miles, but less than 50 feet into my walk, I could see the Jeep tearing down to the end of the ditch and then turn up towards the field. With the sinking feeling, for some odd reason, they were coming for me. I started to run as fast as I could, and the field was uneven and hard to navigate at a quick pace. It was taking all my concentration to run without falling, and when the Jeep swerved right in front of me, I screamed, and I could hear the guys laughing and jeering at me. Half a mile in, the Jeep had cut right in front of me several times, but it never stopped. They seemed to be purposefully driving in circles just to terrify me so they could get a good laugh. I was getting tired, and I was only a couple of 100 feet from my house, and I've never been as thankful to see my father as I had been that day. He must have heard my scream and seen what was happening by chance on a smoke break, and had gone to retrieve his rifle. Standing on the porch, he yelled at me to get my ass into the house, and pointed the gun at the Jeep. I could hear them from behind me, slamming on their brakes and coming to an abrupt stop. When I chanced to look behind me, I could see them speeding off towards the ditch again, yelling about my dad being a psycho with a gun. By the time I got through the door, he had propped up the rifle in the corner of the living room and pulled me into a tight hug. From that day on, I wasn't allowed to go back to the tunnel, and honestly, I lost the desire to see that place anyway. I'm not sure if their sole intent was to mess with my head and upset me for a laugh, or if it was something more sinister. Here's a little backstory. First, I live in a neighborhood with a lot of abandoned houses, and there are about 12 houses in my neighborhood, and over 7 of those houses are abandoned. One of those houses in particular had a playground in the backyard. I was about 12 at the time, and in my head, I knew I was a little too old to be playing on a playground made for 6-year-olds, but how could I resist a nice swing set? I would spend a little of my extra time over there, as it was summer, and I just stayed home playing video games. Now, the house in question was past some woods, and you have to walk about a block away from my home. This took place on a normal day, and my mother said I should get some fresh air, and on top of that, she was tired of me playing all those video games, so I saw this as a perfect opportunity to go to the swing set and watch the beautiful outside and the day pass by. So I saw this as a perfect opportunity to go to the swing set and watch a beautiful day go by. I began getting excited, slipped my shoes on, and walked down to the forest. As I was a few steps in, I heard a branch snap. Now, I heard these all the time from squalls, so I didn't think much of it. I finally finished walking through the forest and reached the house. I opened up the fence and locked it behind me and began swinging. I was about 2 minutes in when I heard breathing, and I stopped for a moment, trying to figure out where the hell this was coming from. I continued to ring back and forth for 5 minutes on the swing, and I was done for now. And as soon as I stood up and decided to go check out the other abandoned houses, I heard,
"Hey."
This shocked me, and I turned around for a moment, and I see a man in his late 30s with dirty, gross black hair all over the place, and a stained-up shirt with underwear with the back cut out. I could see the outline of his ass, and could tell that this guy was obviously homeless. Here I am, a 5'2", 90-pound kid with absolutely no strength, staring at a possible 6-foot man who looked to be around 170 pounds. I tried to be as tough as I could and mustered up the deepest voice and said, "What's up, man?" He continued to stare at me and then began smiling. 15 seconds went by, but from my point of view, it seemed like 40 minutes. He then said,
"Hey kid, that swing seems like it has room for one more. Mind if I join?"
I quickly responded with, "I was actually just leaving. It's all yours, man." The man then opened the gate and walked right past me and got on the swing. I walked towards the gate and saw that the man was staring at me the entire time. Then I began running and shut the gate behind me, and about 20 seconds later, I heard a loud, "Get the fuck back here." I then heard the gate spin open, and I heard moving not far behind me. I practically shit my pants and ran as fast as I could. I took a different path and a shortcut, and then ran into my house and locked the door behind me without the man even noticing where I was. I went and told my mom, practically in tears, and she called the police. The officers then searched around and came back a few hours later with no luck. And that night, I was tossing and turning in my bed when I heard loud shuffling on my street and looked out the window to see the man looking through all the windows on the houses near mine. And I looked out the window and saw the same man looking through all the windows on the houses on my street. I began shaking, and this time, I called the cops, not even telling my parents. And when the officers arrived, they contained the man, not giving us too much information, but they did call us a few days later and told us that the man had obviously had a mental illness and that he'd also been living in one of the abandoned houses for a couple of weeks. They concluded that his plan was most likely to kidnap me and do God knows what. To this day, I still haven't gone back to that swing set, and I haven't even attempted to explore any of the other abandoned houses on my street. I live in a very small town with a surprising amount of abandoned buildings. One of these buildings in particular is where I had the scariest experience of my life so far. For a little background info, the building in this story was actually the house of my great uncle and where my dad, 2 aunts, uncle, and older cousin all grew up. It was abandoned years ago and condemned from trespassing, but of course, people still went there. My 4 neighborhood friends, Melanie, Eli, Jason, and Isaac, and I particularly went there a lot. We called it our secret hideout and hung out there almost every night. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's a big pile of garbage a few yards in front of the house. Also, there are wild grapes that grow by the highway at the edge of the long yard. These things will come up again later. Anyways, things at the house became more and more noticeably different, like scribbles on the walls, loud bangs, footsteps, and more. Me, being the superstitious person I was, mentioned these things to everyone else and asked if it could be something paranormal. My friends brushed me off and continued walking around the property, hanging out. The night this happened on, though, Isaac was visiting family, and Eli and Jason couldn't make it because they had to babysit their little cousin. Melanie, who was the youngest of all of us, decided to go to the hideout with me. Looking back on it, I don't know why we decided to go at night. We had never done so before. Anyways, me and Mel set off towards the hideout, which was down the road across a large ditch. We crossed it and walked along through the shrubbery and rocky area to the house. I could immediately tell that something was off. It just didn't feel right at all. I told Mel something along the lines of, "Do you feel that? It feels strange out here and I don't like it. Should we go?" To which she rolled her eyes and replied, "Lib, you're just being paranoid. Besides, we just got here." I wondered how she could stay so calm when I was so terrified, but I decided to go with what she said and brushed it off. I walked over to the wild grapes, sat down, and watched the cars pass on the highway. Meanwhile, Melanie headed into the house with a flashlight so she could find a coat that she had left there earlier that day. While I was walking by the pile of garbage, I swore I sensed movement in my peripheral from the old chicken coop which was right beside the pile. I just chalked it up to my imagination and kept walking, and I sat down by the grapes and watched the cars for a few minutes until I heard Melanie calling for my name, saying, "Libby, I swear to God, that wasn't funny. Where did you go?" She sounded incredibly mad, and I yelled back, "Mel, what's going on? What happened?" I saw her by the house. She whipped around fast and saw that I was by the highway, and then she began running towards me. Once she got close enough, she began talking very quietly and said, "How are you here? You were just at the house. You closed the front door on me." My heart sank. I quietly said, "Mel, I was right here the entire time. That door has been there for 7 years, rusted in place. I don't think a 14-year-old like me could shut that door that quickly." She then realized what I was saying and said, "We have to get out of here. We have to run." I was on my feet in seconds when we began sprinting towards the rocky entrance to the property. But we were stopped by what looked like a man in his 40s. He was huge, around 6'2" if I had to guess, already waiting for us by the entranceway. Mel screamed at the sight of him, but he seemed to chuckle at this. Then, something very, very terrifying happened. Something that's haunted my memories for many years. He looked straight into my eyes and said,
"You better run, little girlie."
And he began sprinting right at us. It was at that moment that the moonlight reflected a knife in his hand. Fight or flight kicked in, and I quickly pushed Mel towards the road and yelled, "Run!" We sprinted towards the highway. The man, now realizing that we were at a populated area, turned around and ran back into the house. Me and Mel were shaking, and Mel was sobbing uncontrollably. We both walked back to the highway and reached our street, and since we were neighbors, we didn't have to worry about walking home alone. We didn't tell our parents or call the cops because we knew they couldn't do much, as he didn't physically hurt us. We were trespassing in the first place and had no evidence that this all went down. I honestly don't know why I didn't cry or even react for such a long time. I don't know why he stalked us for such a long time before actually trying to hurt us, and I don't know why he targeted us specifically. I don't know who this man is, and I don't know how long it'll take for me not to be scared of my own shadow. I don't even like to think about what would have happened if that man caught us. What I do know is if that sick fuck ever tries to hurt me or my friends again, I'm gonna choose fight instead of flight. I'm not gonna run away again. So I have a few creepy stories involving a specific abandoned building in Liverpool, UK. The building was first used as an orphanage, then turned mental asylum, and finally it became a hospital before it closed down roughly 12 years ago. This story takes place about 2 years ago. I had just started working for a zombie horror event company, where I played one of the zombies. Now the building itself was left with hospital beds, old equipment, and wheelchairs all just lying around. Fuck, one of the hospital beds even had a deflated balloon attached to it. For some reason, that creeped me out quite a lot. So I don't really know where to start with this. I guess there's 4 events that stood out to me more than anything. Okay, so I'll start with what, in my opinion, was the least scary. Now, we worked from 10 a.m. until about 11:30 p.m. So we were typically wandering around in the dark for the last event we do. I was wandering down one of the corridors, poured out of my skull, waiting for customers to come near me so I could scare the shit out of them. Through wandering, I accidentally ended up in the Great Hall, which was the pivotal point in the hospital, the largest and highest room it had. This hall had a little balcony attached to it near the top, the door to which has long been boarded up. As I entered the room, I suddenly got this chill. I could hear very faint crying, and I swear to God, as I looked up, I saw a woman walking off that balcony. Needless to say, I was quite noticeably freaked out, and I ran to find another coworker, which was quite hard to do when everyone was hiding. When I finally did find someone, I was convinced that I was just being paranoid, that I made the whole situation up. But it did take a long time for me to walk around that area alone again. This isn't the only story though. It only got worse from here on. Now on the top floor was a very narrow corridor with little cupboards on the left-hand side, no bigger than 3 feet tall, about 6 feet wide. There was a rumor floating around that when the building was in use as an orphanage, this corridor's cupboards were where they used to lock in little boys who had been naughty. The main story, revolving around this corridor, was that one 9-year-old little boy was locked inside a cupboard one day for being naughty. Apparently the people who had ran the orphanage had forgotten about him for a full week, until they decided to finally unlock the cupboard, and found the boy's corpse and scratch marks all over the door. I'm pretty sure that this was the reason the orphanage was closed down. Now one night, I got assigned to the zone that this rumor supposedly took place in. It was pitch black outside at this point. There were only 2 of us in that zone, so we decided to stick together. It was myself and my friend, let's call her Anna. Now we decided that it'd be a good idea to hide in one of the cupboards and jump out and ambush any survivors that walked by. We left the door open just a crack so we could see any flashlights that passed by. That would show us wherever the customers, or survivors, or whatever you want to call them, were. Each cupboard had 2 doors, so we crammed ourselves into one cupboard each person, keeping out and looking from the door so we could see both ends of the corridor. But out of nowhere, both of the doors slammed, and we couldn't open them. We just sat there in silence, too shocked to speak, and that's when I heard a groan further down the corridor. Anna asked if I could hear it, but I dismissed her, saying it was probably just one of the actors playing their part as a zombie character. That is, until I heard scratching in the cupboard right next to us. I say scratching, but it sounded more like nails going up and down a chalkboard. The groaning grew closer and closer with each second, and luckily for us, we saw flashlights coming down the corridor a few seconds later, and just as suddenly as it started, it all stopped, and we were free again. I honestly don't know what would have happened to us if they arrived a minute or so later. I never really went near there again. These last 2 stories happened on the same day at the same time. This was probably the scariest day I'd ever had. So, it started with one of the staff members, let's call her Sarah, going missing within the grounds. We found her shoes and her goggles, but not her. Now keep in mind, we were required to keep our goggles on at all times. Part of the game was that the zombies were shot with airsoft bullets. And let me tell you, that shit hurts and can make you bleed through layers of clothes. Hell, I even lost a tooth to one. So her leaving her goggles behind was a huge problem. So we all had radios to get in contact with each other. We usually used them to relay the customers' locations, so we knew which zones they had to stay in. All 35 or so staff members were looking for her, so we all had radios to get in contact with each other. The zombies on one frequency to communicate and relay survivors' locations, so we knew which zones had to stay in character and which zones were free to look for Sarah. The staff members acting as the army had their own frequency for the same reasons. This is where the second creepy situation happened. I was sat with a friend, taking a break from looking, when both our radios started going off. A weird, crackly voice came over the radio and said,
"I can see you. Can you not see me?"
Obviously, we both freaked out, but we didn't reply. A few seconds later, it blared up again, and this time it screamed,
"I'm coming for you."
I nearly had a heart attack right then and there on the spot. We hightailed it out of there, looking for other people, and we finally found a few army staff and zombies in a group. I'd love to say that this was the end of it, but it wasn't. It turns out that they all heard this as well. We all just try to chalk it up to someone pranking us, but it doesn't explain how they managed to do so on 2 different radio frequencies at the same time, and everyone had at least one person confirming that it wasn't them doing it. The creepy radio messages continued throughout the night. We even changed frequencies at one point, but it still found us. In the end, we just turned the radios off, which, honestly, I'm not sure why we didn't just do in the first place. I guess people just wanted to have constant contact with each other, especially with all this going on. But back to Sarah. There were sightings of her around the grounds throughout the day, but she seemingly disappeared every time someone got too close. We did eventually find her in the bell tower of the building. The location of this site was host to another famous death. And the rumor was that during the building's mental asylum days, there was a young woman who escaped from her room and ran up to the bell tower. No one thought to look up there, so by the time they found her, she hung herself from the beams above, which I guess is why we found it so unnerving to find Sarah sat directly under said rope, hunched over, rocking back and forward, speaking to herself unintelligibly. They took her to the hospital not too long after that, and I never saw her again. They said that she had a psychotic episode due to forgetting to take meds, but due to all the things that had happened before, I'm not so sure that's what really happened. A lot of weird shit went on in that building, and I stopped working there soon after. Now, I don't know if the cause of all of this was just the darkness and how run down and beat up that building was, or if it was the fact that it still had patients' beds, clothes, balloons, and stories to even go at the place. I even remember finding a Ouija board in one of the abandoned rooms on the ghost tour. That kind of freaked me out a little. I still know a few friends that work for this company, and they all have their own freaky experiences. I'll tell you one thing, this place is not for the faint of heart. My name is Ben. This is the reason why I stopped trick-or-treating and stopped even looking at abandoned houses. The day this took place on, I was trick-or-treating with 3 of my best friends, one of them being my cousin. We were going from house to house asking for candy, even though we were 16 at the time. One of my friends, we'll call him Albert, said that his old house was around the area. After Albert told us that no one lived in it, and it is now abandoned, our eyes lit up. Being our teenage selves, we decided to go check it out. When we got there, the house looked to be in horrible condition, as are all abandoned places. We went to the backyard, and Albert told us that we needed to climb in through the window, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. Before we went in, I looked up towards the 2nd floor window, and I'm sure I saw a silhouette of a man, but it was gone a second after I looked at it. I just brushed it off as me being paranoid since it was Halloween, and climbed in after my friends. After we entered, we all picked up on an oddly good smell in the house. It smelled somewhat like air freshener that had just been sprayed everywhere. Literally 10 seconds passed, and we heard the noise of someone walking on the wooden floor upstairs. Now, my suspicions were confirmed. There was definitely a man upstairs. Me and my friend gave each other that look and raced out of there as quickly as we could. While climbing out the window, I looked back at the dark room, and I heard and saw a shadow coming down the stairs. It screamed,
"Wait, don't leave. I have candy for you."
I felt like 1,000 pounds fell on my chest when I heard that, and I jumped out the window and we ran to my friend's house. We were all really scared, and we all decided that we'd never go near there again. But looking back on it, It was a pretty interesting experience to say the least.